Hello, welcome, teacher Mr. Loria. Unbearable Lightness of Being. This is section 3, right? This is or part 3, words misunderstood. We're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about Franz, about Sabina, about sex and songs, about the rapture, right? About growth and maturity, and how two things can mean, or one thing can mean two different things, and the musical composition of life. So, really neat chapter. Beautifully told. I mean, it's so literary, this chapter. It's amazing. And it functions in, it talks about how things are misunderstood between two different people. Foil character is something that's, one of those phrases that bad English teachers throw around a lot. But in this situation, the two of them it works. It works. These are two characters who really contrast one another. So let's talk about Franz. And then let's quote the great American philosopher Omar from The Wire, right? Omar in The Wire says that every man has a code, right? Every man has a code. And Franz has a very, explicit code at first. He changes a lot throughout, the best 9 months of his life, as it's called, right? So he does have a code that changes, right? He goes from, the mistress and his wife, and he doesn't want to sleep with, both in the span of several hours. He feels like that would be wrong. And he says, Franz was love was not an extension of public life, but its antithesis, right? So he's an interesting character. He would have rather slept by himself, but the marriage bed is still the symbol of the marriage bond, and bonds, symbols, as we know, are inviolable, right? Notice his code is he's all about the public symbols, the marriage bed. And he kind of has this well-ordered life. And then, right? He meets Sabina, and she changes a lot of things for him. She is a fascinating character, absolutely fascinating. A lot more complex, I would say, than Franz. So let's get into and look at this sentence, right? She's talking about this bowler hat, and she was amazed at the number of years she had spent pursuing one lost moment. One lost moment. So let's talk about that moment. She answers that. And then it talks about one time she answers the door with, with Tomas, and they make kind of wild, once in a blue moon kind of love making that and it's different. It's very different, right? She is either an amazing muse or a very tragic character, depending on how you look at her. There is a song by Sublime, right, where he's he says, she said, "You're not the only one, but you're the best, Bradley." Boat, right? So Sabina he kind of collects lovers. She's an artist, right? And so, she has this thing, which is this bowler hat. Notice too that she likes to be commanded. She likes to be, she likes to be commanded. Those are skins, by the way, right? These are skins. Anyway, those are skins. I had that in a whip and a couple other things, and I've so it's interesting to see that people do like to be commanded, and that Sabina and Franz differ in a lot of ways. For example, is betrayal a good thing? Franz would say that's first, right? No. Sabina says yes, right? Is privacy important? Franz says no, at first, right? That the public and the private life need to be united, and you need to be kind of that, true to yourself. Is privacy important to Sabina? Absolutely, fundamentally, right? Do you have to be true to yourself? There's this divide between public and private life. Is that important? To Franz, you need to have that. You need to be one person. To Sabina, it's okay to be two. Music, right? Is music a good thing or a bad thing? Franz, he loves music. Sabina, not so much. And it kind of gets into what is real, right? And it also touches on. Let's see, how do I put this? Right? Kind of what do you want to get out of life, right? Franz has this. He kind of seems to take intellectual fascination in other things. He kind of thinks his life is kind of boring and mundane, and maybe a little well too within the lines. And Sabina, who kind of lived through this exile, etc., right? she has a very different perspective and experience. And at first, he kind of like romanticizes that in her. But we'll get back to that. I want to talk for a second about. They mentioned that the bowler hat was a motif in the musical composition that was Sabina's life. And this is an interesting point that this author makes. He basically says, like, your life is like a song, right? Baby, you a song. Make me want to. All right, stay focused. Okay, so your life is like a song, and when two people meet when they're younger, right, their songs aren't fully like formed and developed. So you can kind of enter each other's song and kind of like go along together. Right, musical composition of their lives is still in the opening bars. They can writing it together and exchange motifs. But if they meet when they're older, their musical compositions are more or less complete. Every object, every word means something different to each of them. And then he goes into presenting these two different like word and like this one thing that means two different things to both people, and it's really well done. You know, suffering, etc. Let's see, fidelity, again, betrayal, right? For Franz, music, right? For Franz, music was the art that comes the closest to the Dionysian beauty and the sense of intoxication. This is interesting, right? I wanted to talk about rapture and what it means to be alive and that sense of intoxication. I think he alludes to it earlier when Teresa like talks about the mist that she enters into during sex and then she screams. What is this kind of intoxication? This like this beautiful realm of life. Does it exist? And then what is it, right? It's interesting. And let's see. So remember that Franz likes music. It's the anti-word, which is interesting since he is a professor, right? He's somebody that makes his living off of the word, and yet he likes this thing that is the anti-word. Let's see here. Light and darkness, and this is very important, right? This Sabina talks about how Franz keeps his eyes closed during sex and doesn't like a light on, and I guess like at the time it was very like, you know, that was kind of like conservative and like babyish, right? It was you turn the lights on and enjoy the moment. So he closes his eyes during that, and then there's obviously like a level going on where Franz is like very like physically strong, right? I am Franz, right? He's physically strong. He's emotionally like weak. He's kind of like weak, and she doesn't really like that in him, and that really comes out when they. Ooh, this is a beautiful part, right? Want to get to that in a second, right? There's this moment here too, and Sabina says she's talking to the other emigres, right? And they're like, "Well, why didn't you do anything?" Blah blah blah. And this is brilliant, right? She would have liked to tell them that behind communism, fascism, behind all occupations and invasions lurks a more basic, pervasive evil, and that is the image of that emo was the parade of people marching by with raised fists and shouting identical syllables in union. Whoa, right? She knew she would never be able to make them understand. Like, what is that? Like that orgiastic, like fury, like excitement that people get into when they're in crowds, or you know, when they want to have like violence. Basically, I just watched another very disappointing game by my Washington Redskins, and you know, we fill up these stadiums to watch this parade of violence, and then when we march in the streets, right, when people kind of like take political action, there's that, I don't know, that excitement. Where were we going? What was I about to talk about instead? Oh yeah, when they are making love for like the last time, right? And the inner space of old age, it felt the strange, incomprehensible ecstasy that void had evoked in him, right? That void, that sense of beauty. When Franz comes out of the closet, so to speak, with his with the name of Sabina, and she doesn't like this. They make love like the last time. She's saying goodbye, basically. And it is a little bit, she calls it pathetic, that he's like this really strong guy who like closes his eyes and like suckles at her breast. She's like, he's a child. Like, I can't be with this like child. She wants him to grow up. She wants him to evolve. And right, that moment is obviously very different for them. He felt like a rider galloping off into the magnificent void, a void of no wife, no daughter, no household, the magnificent void, right? A magnificent void. Each were riding each other like a horse, and galloping off in the distance of their desires, drunk on the betrayal that freed them. Whoa, right? absolutely beautiful in that moment, right? And that kind of goes back to think about how different it is when Tomas and Franz like have sex with Sabina. She alludes to that, like Tomas would make her kind of walk around on a mirror, and we know too that Tomas had like that command of like strip, right, which he uses with a lot of his lovers, and there's something very interesting in that, but the change that happens in Franz when he goes back to home, his wife kicks him out, and he grabs. I love that he takes a couple of his choice books, moves into this little flat, and becomes kind of like this bachelor. Quickly picks up, by the way, like another lover. He talks about this kind of confidence that he had, and when this chapter ends, like he has changed a lot, and his private devotion is Sabina, right? He has this like cult of like love about Sabina and about like what she meant for him in those moments, right? He closed his eyes and he closed them on Sabina's body in 15 European hotels and one in America, right? So he does have that private life that she had like earlier wanted to evoke in him. Now what happens to her? She's so complex. It's hard to kind of talk about her in 30 seconds, but we get this letter and she finds out that Tomas has died and she goes to a graveyard. Tomas and Teresa are dead. They died in the same instant in that they became a pulp, right? Those two die together, right? And when that happens, she feels very like she misses everyone. So we're gonna continue to talk about her. I think Franz is an interesting character. I mean, this whole section is brilliant, beautiful, very complex. I hope you don't mind that I told it in kind of an irregular way, since it's an irregular chapter. And we'll keep going. This is a tough book. It's philosophically just beautiful. There's a lot going on, lots. So keep at it. Keep reading.